moderator of the next panel, which will focus on environmental and water issues in Africa. That panel will be moderated by the distinguished journalist Ian Joseph of the Sky News. So please give a round of applause.
So, welcome one and all. My name is Ian Joseph, and I'd like to consider myself a child of the Commonwealth. Born in the UK, partly schooled in the Caribbean, and married to a Nigerian, I think I cover all the bases, and I learned that title. So, our topic today is climate change. What are the issues, priorities, and most importantly, the solutions for Commonwealth Africa? And we want to pay particular attention to how to beat Africa's water crisis and how to promote a sustainable lifestyle on the continent. Last year, I'll just tell you quickly, I attended the European Union Our Ocean Conference in Malta, where delegates from all over the world came together to analyse how best to improve our ocean health. Many millions were pledged to achieve this goal, and it was heartening to see some African countries in attendance. Now, in January last year, Sky News, my company, launched the Sky Ocean Rescue Campaign to urge people to swap single-use plastics out of their lives. The task ahead, a huge one, to combat the whole-scale pollution of the world's oceans. Now, between 4.8 million and 12.7 million tonnes of plastic ends up in the world's oceans every year and can be found everywhere, from the poles to the equator, on coastlines, on the sea surface and on the sea floor. Plastic makes up 95% of the rubbish in our oceans, mainly in the form of bags, food, drink containers and fishing equipment. And from past studies, it's estimated that as many as 90% of the world's seabirds have plastic in their stomachs. So much to be done. Let's bring Africa into the equation now. We're going to discuss very many topics in this session, and I hope you'll all contribute and ask questions at the end. So let's introduce the panel. First up, Olga Gazarian. She'd like to come up to the stage. Olga has more than 25 years of global experience in international development and in the humanitarian field. She's currently the Director of International Programs for WaterAid. That's a global charity working on water and sanitation in more than 35 countries. Olga's in charge of WaterAid programs in Africa and Asia. She moved to WaterAid from Oxfam GB, where she was the International Programs Director in charge of more than 50 countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Thank you, Olga, for taking part. Next up is Paul Smith-Lomas. Paul Smith took up his appointment as CEO of Practical Action in November 2015. Prior to this appointment, he was Practical Action's International Director, responsible for the overall operation of its programs and policy influencing around the world. Is Paul here? Would you like to come up? Paul's professional background is as a mechanical engineer. He worked originally in the water treatment industry in the UK before going on VSO assignment in 1985 to Eastern Sudan, where he set up water and sanitation systems for refugee populations from Eritrea and Ethiopia. Next, I'd like to call up His Excellency Dr. Hassan Ahmad Hilal, the Minister for Environment for Sudan. He started his working life in his father's business in the field of import and export, and then he started to industrialise his family business in the field of spinning, weaving and ready-made clothes. Following on from his MSc degree in 1974, he went on to achieve a PhD in economic development, and in 2005, as a DUP member, he became a Member of Parliament, and in 2011, he became the Minister of Environment, Forest and Physical Development. Welcome. Next up is Charlotte Koch, Director for Green Architecture Limited. Charlotte is a Danish woman passionate about Africa. Charlotte, would you like to come up? together with her German husband, Jürgen Koch. They're pioneers in sustainable green building design with energy efficiency, off-grid renewable energy supply and a zero carbon footprint. Charlotte puts people and the environment first. The Kochs designed the Deloitte Green Building headquarters in Germany and the worldwide first carbon-neutral sustainable green building supermarket operated by 100% renewable energy, saving 435 tonnes of carbon emission. Charlotte wants to take this concept to Africa. She believes sustainable construction and cost effectiveness are not contradictions. I'd like to call up now David Croft. David is the Global Sustainable Development Director at Diageo. He's a trustee of the Food Ethics Council and he's been involved in numerous initiatives to improve supply chain standards across the food sector, engaging extensively with government departments and NGOs. He's led large multi-stakeholder partnerships on sustainable agricultural and community development, working with farmers, governments and NGOs. Welcome. And last but not least, Wagaki Wisniewski. She's the head of Lead Media and Communication Specialist for the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Would you like to come up? She's responsible for strategic relations with the media and public outreach, including for the Convention senior management and staff of both the UNCCD Secretariat and the Global Mechanism. She's worked on projects and campaigns with global teams from all over the world, and prior to joining the Convention, she was an editor and writer with the reporting services of the International Institute for Sustainable Development based in Canada. That's a mouthful. Welcome to the panel. If you'd like to just give them a round of applause. So, we'd like to open by each one of you giving a short statement as to your commitment to developing environmental issues within the Commonwealth of Africa. So we'll start with you first.
Thank you. The impacts of climate change are largely felt by ordinary people and most often by the poorest people through their access to drinking water and sanitation. And the injustice of climate change is that its impacts mostly affect those countries that have done the least to cause it. And climate change is water change. So it affects water cycles in disruptive ways. So it's either too much water, which is flood, or too little water, which is drought. And it threatens to undo some of the positive gains made in water and sanitation coverage. But climate change is often blamed for everything. It is blamed for lack of sustainability of services. And the sad fact is that it is not the main reason why wells stop working or why latrines fall out of function. It is by no means the only threat to water security. And these threats include, there are a changing climate worsens the existing threats, and these threats include poor governance of services, poor governance of water resources, environmental degradation, growing demand for water, and threats to water quality. The bad news is that there is no out-of-box quick fixes to addressing Africa's water crisis. But the good news is that collective action between the governments, businesses, civil society are required to demonstrate responsible water stewardship. So there are two ways in which to address that. There are technological solutions that are needed, such as fixing water leaks, elevated platforms for infrastructure in flood-prone areas, increasing storage capacity, reducing water resources, etc. But first and foremost, political solutions are required, such as integrating policies, water and sanitation policies with adaptation policies. Water resources, water services for domestic consumption and public institutions need adequate financing. And the financing should be in both requiring the blend of commercial finances, domestic resource mobilizations through tariffs, taxes, and transfers. And the other really important part is improving governance and sector capacity. So we at WaterAid have a mission of universal coverage within one generation of water and sanitation. And we work in 17 countries in Commonwealth nations. And we work with communities to install water points and sanitation facilities, but we also work with governments at local and national level to build climate resilience and to strengthen national institutions and to sustain services far beyond one of the projects.
Thank you very much, Olga. Let's move on to Paul now. What's the statement, your mission statement?
I'm not sure we've got a mission statement. Practical Action's a non-government organisation working with technology to find solutions to some of the world's poorest people. I don't know if Sudan is a sort of a theme of today, but one of the first places I was asked to go to as the chief executive of Practical Action was to visit Darfur. Darfur notoriously, 10 years ago, was the site of allegedly the first climate-induced conflict in the world. So going there, I was a bit nervous, to be honest. People said you'd find deserts and conflicts and difficulties. But visiting Practical Action technology-based projects, I found verdant fields, I found vibrant communities, I found people working with a very simple traditional technology of water harvesting. An old technology that we worked with a local university to improve and develop, and helped farmers to farm in fields that hadn't been cultivated for 20 years because of lack of rainfall. And here's the thesis: technology has answers for many of the challenges that Africa faces today. But it's not just any old technology, it has to be the right technology. It needs to be sustainable, repairable, and it needs to be engaged with communities. And through engagement with both all sorts of communities working in the same area, we were able to support pastoralists, agriculturists to have a viable livelihood living off the land. And indeed, we were awarded the Land for Life Award last year by United Nations in celebration of what has been an amazing simple technological solution. But for me, the real excitement about the story of our work in Darfur is not what we're doing today, it's what actually the government is doing today, because the government has embraced these ideas and is now rolling out replication of this work across the area. So I guess my thesis is technology, and the right technology, has solutions for challenges of climate change today and in the future.
Paul, thank you. Well, that leads us beautifully on to His Excellency Dr. Hassan Ahmed Helal, Minister for Environment for Sudan. High praise there that action is being taken. Do you want to expand on the detail of what actually is being done?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good day. In fact, my name is Hassan Abdelkadir Hilal, not Hassan Ahmed Hilal. So it is the first foul that my name should be corrected. I am the Minister of Environment in Sudan. And it is true that, as my colleague said, there is a problem of water availability or accessibility, because water is abundant in some places and scarce in other places. So this is what we call water management, water management. But what I am going to say in my speech today, it gives me good and profound and great pleasure to have been invited to address the Commonwealth Africa Summit 2018 as guest panelist. It is exciting to me to represent my country, Sudan, and myself, a Federal Minister of Environment, and have the opportunity to meet with the Commonwealth members and Africa citizens whose countries took right decision to join the Commonwealth and to continue as members. The summit is a golden opportunity for extending the relations and strengthening the cooperation between the Commonwealth countries for the benefit and common good of the members, particularly the African members. The future outlook of the summit accommodates political reforms, economic development. This is very important. Accommodates political reforms, economic development, and peace within the perspective of Agenda 2063. We need peace and stability and development, empowering the youth leadership for development in Africa. Sudan has not been a member of the Commonwealth in spite of the historical links and the high potential for being a member. This brings me to say that presently it is high time for Sudan to join the Commonwealth to contribute in fulfillment. It is high time for Sudan to join the Commonwealth to contribute in the fulfillment of the common good of Africa and control of the difficulties facing Africa, African development. Various challenges and obstacles are facing Africa, causing increasing poverty, hunger, slow development, creating strong fuel for conflicts, wars, migration. And migration is very important here because we are losing our youth. They have to stay for development. Wars, migration, and displacement. Climate change, which is becoming a reality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a reality. Nobody could deny that. This climate change represents a serious problem causing serious environmental disasters, economic crisis, and social conflicts. This is clearly observable in low-income groups who are suffering from climate change impacts such as scarcity of water, I myself as a Minister of Environment, if I am asked what is the key factor in development, I would say water. So water scarcity, low productivity, unemployment, spread of disease, mortality, and increasing incidence and severity of conflicts. Sudan was well aware of the changes that the environment was facing. Since early times of the 20th century, Sudan is observing the declining trend of rainfall, continuous rising of temperature, expanding land degradation, and collapse of production systems. In 1912, the British administration in Sudan initiated solutions by establishing the Soil Conservation Committee, and in 1940, Land Reform Act was issued to integrate natural resources sustainable management as a solution to climate variability and changes. The establishment of the Department of Forestry in 1901 was followed by the establishment of the Department of Agriculture in 1902 is a strong indication of the importance of natural resources, good management for better management of the environment. These historical contributions of Sudan in remedy and amelioration of climate change and mitigation of impacts constituted a strong experience for Sudan to globally contribute in climate change solutions, both in the field of adaptation and mitigation. Sudan signed and ratified all environmental agreements, including the climate change agreement and contributed to climate solutions by fulfillment of its commitments. The issuance of Sudan National Communication Report 1998, 2003 and 2018 and the financial and technical plans of the Nationally Determined Contribution NDCs submitted by Sudan at the COP21 in Paris 2015 are but limited examples. So I don't want to take long time, but I will try to get very fast. These are the outcomes of my excitement and feeling of unrest that Sudan has such huge experience and knowledge coupled with rich natural resources that have to be exposed to the world. As a Minister of Environment, I thought of many contributions. The strongest contribution of Sudan in the global climate issues is the accommodated in Sudan proposal of COP22. COP22 in Marrakesh in 2016, we said we have an initiative, Africa Carbon Sink Initiative, to avoid CO2. CO2 is a killing gas, which was well appreciated by all delegates. This initiative is based on the huge potentialities of Africa for absorbing the atmosphere carbon and reduction of emissions based on widely extended forest land in African countries and intensification of agriculture to save the land for forests. The ultimate objective is to reduce global average temperature to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. The initiative was built on the Sudan concept note stated as climate justice in provision of finance, technology, capacity building, and control of loss and damages. The initiative has been supported by the African nations representing the AMSIN, consisting of 54 countries, and Sudan was the chief negotiator. So Sudan is prepared to join hands with African follows towards cooperation, coordination, and collaboration on issues of mutual interest within climate change perspectives. African countries are well organized in regional partnership such as Pan-African Forum of GGW, which Great Green Wall in Africa, IGAD, Drought, SADC, and others, which are all concerned with economic reforms. Good practices at national levels to support climate adaptation mitigation included many approaches. The human resource development in Sudan consisted enhancement of the process towards solutions for the climate change. So we have volunteers as lead authors in the IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change Assessment reports participation in Africa. Since climate dialogue in 2007, Sudan had 8 experts who were lead authors in the first assessment, and now we have more than 1,000 experts. So Sudan experts have been able to plan the National Adaptation Program of Action, NAPA, which accommodated programs and projects. So recently, the Minister of Environment submitted the environmental law to the National Parliament and was ratified in 2017. This represents strong breakthrough in environmental protection. So Sudan will continue is cooperation in driving Africa trade through the lands of Africa. Now we have two recommendations. One, I recommend that Africa task for carbon sink initiative. This is carbon sequestration process proposed by Sudan is to be adopted and financed to enhance the implementation of CAS objectives. I strongly recommend that Sudan join the Commonwealth. This is the second recommendation. I strongly recommend that Sudan join the Commonwealth in order to work jointly with the African bloc. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Let's move on to Charlotte Kochner, Director for Green Architecture.
That was, you couldn't have done it better. You know, the word sustainability actually comes from forestry. More than 300 years ago. It started in the silver mines, in this case in Germany, where they were cutting too much trees. So the nature was no more in balance. So they set up a rule to control that, to keep the balance in nature. Later, the Club of Rome took over the meaning of this word in German, sustainability, and turned it into the word sustainability. So sustainability means long-term balance. And that's what we need to secure. So we believe in and work ourselves in integrated interdisciplinary planning. We believe in that should not only be done in architectural design, but in sustainable development of projects and infrastructure, all with a holistic approach. Holistic approach means that we have to consider energy, resources, people, and the youth in especially because they are the future. But we also need, for all, local content. I'm not from Africa, but I'm passionate about Africa, and I believe in delivering solutions together with Africa and in Africa for local conditions, African solutions with locals in Africa. So come and talk to us if you want to be part of that. We would love to do that. What I want to mention, what we have found is very important. The reason why I said thank you is because the supermarket that is now a replicable model of 120 supermarkets in Germany is a solution of what you talked about. It is sustainable forestry wood, from sustainable forest management, the construction. It's cellulose insulation. It's 445 tons of CO2 emission saving per supermarket. It's sustainable construction and cost effective at the same time. That's because the reason why we are allowed not only to build one, but that is now a rollout model for investors. It's energy efficient and it's 100% renewable energy supply in operation. And compared to the construction cost, the cost for operating a supermarket in the past, we save, for that German group, we save 63% on the energy. And we use the daylight as a resource. We control the daylight so that we can use it sensibly to saving 30% of the electricity bill. So think about how much sunlight and daylight we have in Africa. It's a free resource, and there are a lot of more resources, so we have to think in risk and disaster management connected to sustainable development. Look at local resources, think circular economy, think natural capital, and connect that with the people and social impact investing. Therefore, we are also involved in the project that we are looking for, coming for, in this case in Nigeria, to take the topic leadership in Africa forwards. What is worth mentioning in that context is what we found out is that leadership often in Africa means something else than it means in Europe. So, now comes an important one. Leadership is about being role models to serve and show the way for the future, not to be served.
Yeah.
So build on that, let's do it.
Thank you. David Croft now, Global Sustainable Development Director for Diageo.
Thank you, Julia. So Diageo is a global company, but particularly in Africa, it's very much about a local business. Businesses like Guinness in Nigeria, or Tusker and East African breweries in Kenya. And the history of both of those companies, and even the origins of Guinness originally, were very much around thinking about how, as a business, you would grow whilst enabling the communities where you work and where you live also to grow. And that principle of inclusive growth is still at the heart of what Diageo does today all over the world. But particularly in Africa, and particularly around climate change, it's critical that for us to grow, the communities where we work and where we operate also have to thrive and prosper. And that's at the heart of our sustainability strategy. And in terms of climate change, it's something that we've all got to work together upon to try and deliver. We can't deliver it on our own. We're strongly committed to delivering and supporting the delivery of the Paris Agreement. We've aligned our work around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly thinking there about climate change and about water and sanitation, amongst half a dozen or so others that are really important to us and to the communities where we operate. And as part of that, we've set ourselves some really challenging targets. We promised to reduce our carbon emissions by 2020 by 50% in absolute terms. Now you might say, well, what's the difference? What does absolute terms mean? It means that irrespective of how we grow as a business, we will reduce the amount of carbon our business emits. And at the moment, we've achieved more than 40% reduction. And the same is true on water. We've reduced by more than 40% of the water that we use, which for a drinks company is a huge change. And it starts to play off in terms of how we then work within those communities. It means we're implementing biomass energy, solar energy, water efficiency, cleaner water going back into lakes or seas close to where we work. I was in Kampala not too long ago, and we've implemented a new water treatment plant there. To say that the water goes back cleaner than we extracted it is an understatement, unfortunately. But it tells you the sorts of challenges that Africa faces, and also the sorts of roles that businesses like Diageo can play. And if I think just a little bit more about water, because while climate change as a whole is hugely important for everybody, water is a real clear and present issue for many people in Africa. And we have in our water blueprint 4 key approaches. The first thing is to reduce the water that we use. And as part of that, we're also committed to replenishing all of the water that we use in water-stressed areas, so it becomes an even-sum game. The second thing we do is working with people like WaterAid to think about the communities where we work and to implement community water programs and sanitation programs, which have meant that over the last 10 years we've helped about 12 million people in Africa alone to get safe water and sanitation. And that goes back to the principle of what I was saying, that if they thrive, then businesses thrive and countries thrive. And then the third key piece, particularly with water, and it was crucial hearing what the Minister was talking about before, is the premise that you can't do it on your own. Because the third thing we focus upon is where the water is drawn from. Not the well, but the total catchment area of water that we're part of. And who do we have to work with and mobilise and motivate to work together so that collectively we're supporting water for the community, everybody, including ourselves, for the long term. And that's why working around the Tana River Basin, around Nairobi in Tanzania, working around the Tana River Basin, around Nairobi in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in Ghana, water catchment area management, and most importantly, the collaboration with civil society, with governments, with other companies is really critical to supporting that. And that means that every community can prosper wherever you are. And the last thing I wanted to say is that the other key part of water that's often forgotten is what it means for food security. And we've heard a little bit today about how it impacts often on the poorest rural communities. We work with about 50,000 smallholder farmers, people who only farm maybe 2 or 3 hectares, people who are really dependent upon crops for their livelihoods. And that's where working at that catchment area management is critical, because it helps them plan for the future. And we're helping to train them to be better farmers so they can grow more to support food security, but in a manner progressively that uses less water. Less water, same output. And that's critical to their future livelihoods, as well as food security, as well as the agricultural supply chain that we and indeed many others depend upon. And when we join it all together, it starts to feel like there might be a sustainable future there. But we have to work darn hard together to bring that together, to bring that to pass, I think, over the next few years. And 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals, in real terms, it's just around the corner. And we have to be doing stuff today, tomorrow. It's no use come 2028.
David, thank you. United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification.
Can I just come over there because I'd like to show some pictures.
Oh,
Thank you. I'm glad I came last because a lot of the things that everyone has spoken about is what we care about. And the agenda for this whole 3-4 days is about Agenda 2063, that's about Africa, and doing it for the common good. And if you look at the Agenda 2063, it has 7 major aspirations. I don't know whether you know all of them, but I'll look at the very first one because that's what concerns all of us here and that ties us all together. And that's the agenda of wanting to be a prosperous Africa. These are the words I find in that statement for the popular version that you might have seen. Inclusive growth, sustainable development, what do they want to see there? Modern agriculture, unique natural endowments, environmental and ecosystems that are valued and that are protected. And right at the bottom it says, we want the GDP of Africa to be proportionate to the share of the world's population and natural endowments. Now, if Africa's natural resources go down, if in the development of our natural resources, if we lose those resources, what will our GDP look like? Because there seems to be a correlation there that's built. And I'd like to, who's got the presentation? Where is it? Okay, it was supposed to be a PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you the dream of where Africa is saying it wants to come from to where it wants to go. What Egypt looked like in 1977, a part of Egypt, and what it looks like today. And it's taken a lot of change. The question is, can we achieve a transformational change in Africa, adapting to climate change, developing, and mitigating, because that is the challenge before us. The speaker from Germany talked about the way forests were degraded in Europe in the quest for development. It's happened in Brazil, it's happened in other countries around the world. Are we going to do the same? We can't, and we shouldn't, and we mustn't. Yeah. The interesting thing is, we have 45 years, and you might think that 45 years is not enough time. It's actually a lot of time to do what we need to do. But we have to do it in a way that we can create jobs for young people. The elephant in the room in that question is, in that issue is, what is the quality of our young people? What kind of jobs are we talking about? What skill sets do they have that will enable them to move from the level they're at? Because for some reason, poverty, food insecurity seems to coincide with people who are working in rural areas, working on the land. And these are the natural resources that we are hoping we're going to use to develop and adapt to climate change and not destroy them. It's almost impossible. Sorry? Well, so this is a house in Egypt, and it was a dreamer, I call him a dreamer from Egypt, who decided it's a desert, but yes, it's his home, and he's going to restore it. That was 1977. This is the same house in 2016. This is a picture that he took in 2016. The question is, can we move from where he was in 1977 to 2016? Between now and 2063, I think we have about 45 years. Count the years. Next. So this is our reality. I live in Germany, and I've learned living in Germany not only to dream, but also to look at my reality. This is our reality. This is a picture I took in Agadez, Niger, where there are lots of migrants coming from Africa into Europe. It's a transit point. And if you look, what really stood out for me on this trip is that a lot of the men that were standing behind the trucks, you can see a truck right behind there, they were actually men. There weren't many women. And this little truck here is one of the ones that we caught up with that was leaving that night. And these young people were heading to Libya. This is the kind of reality we're talking about. A lot of the young people we're talking about are coming from rural areas. Why? Because 65% of Africa, of the land in Africa, is somewhat degraded in some way, shape, or form. And it has to do with the water shortage that they're talking about. The question is, can we move from this situation, and how do we do it? How do we help the governments to do it? To a world where in 2063, we have our resources intact, we have developed, and we have adapted to climate change. Now we have some problems along the way. Next slide. Keep going. The question is, can we do it? Now, others have done it, and I want to show where it's been done. So just keep going, flipping through. This is Turkey, and I've shown the house. You see the house, the red house? This was in 1991. This is 2000, barely 9 years. You can see the difference. Keep going. That's the same ecosystem, before and after. The difference you can see is about 10 years. Keep going. This is again Turkey, 1961, what it looked like, 1998, what it looks like today. A lot of the African environments look like that. Keep going. That's China. This is a desert. This is not land degradation. This is a desert area that's been restored that way by a private company, not by government. Keep going. This is the city. This is a company that's restored the area because they needed to transport a plant that they were growing outside of the region, and they couldn't because the roads were constantly having sand and dust storms. They started restoring the land, but what it looks now, look at what it looks now, and he's a billionaire. So there is the ability to make money, to restore the land, and to manage the landscape. Keep going. Next slide, that's the same city. This is where we were last year. Now the question is, how do we do it? How do we adapt? How do we build resilience? And how do we develop? Now, we've talked a lot about the water shortages and water scarcity, and I have 7 C's. There are 7, what I call 7 C's of that. One is just pure shortage. There are areas where there is no water for whatever reason, and a lot of it is linked to the land. Second, poor quality of water. So you might have water, but it might be polluted from chemicals, from the fertilizers, or from human waste. That's another thing. The third one is climate change. We are losing a lot of wetlands in Africa. You know about Lake Chad, we talk about Lake Turkana. There are rivers that are drying up, partly because of climate change that's driving people to cultivate more and more of the wetlands, and that's coming with a lot of environmental challenges. The other aspect of climate change is extreme weather events, whether it's water, it's raining too early, or the rains are delaying, or when it comes, you get rainfall that should fall for a month within a few days, so people are not able to survive. The fifth one is the disruption of water flows. She talked about energy and the amount of dams Africa probably wants to construct to provide energy. I think, I don't know, it's frightening to get like 300 dams or something like that. But what about the renewable energy she's talking about? What about the sunshine? If Germany can do it, with all the winter that I've seen, how much more can Africa do it? The sixth sin is the loss of biodiversity. Some of us remember the drought in Niger in 1984. A frightening thing that I learned was that part of the reason there was that drought in 1984 in Niger is because the delta area dried up, and that delta area provides a lot of food and fish for the communities in those regions, and a lot of them fled. So we have to start thinking about the river systems and what we're doing to them. And lastly, and this is what concerns me and my convention, is land degradation, because in whatever way, shape, or form you look at these issues of water, you come back to the question of the land. The land that you have may well determine whether you can do what you want to do. The whole issue about land acquisitions in Africa is about water. At the bottom of it is water. The question is, how do we do it and how can we do it? I offer two solutions, or let me say the convention offers two solutions, and this is what we are focusing on. One came with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's something we had talked about a lot for many, many years, but it gave us something to hold on to, and it's called becoming land degradation neutral. What does that mean? It's a small term, but it means a lot. You have to avoid degrading new land. So if you want to mine, or if you want to create new agricultural land, we have first to stop or avoid degrading any new land. 65% of Africa is degraded in some way, shape, or form. We cannot do more. We cannot continue to do that. Second thing is we have to reduce that. How do you do that? It's the agricultural practices that we use. And related to that is to reverse what we've already degraded as they did in Europe. So that's the one thing, become land degradation neutral. In Africa, I'm proud to say that all countries except 3 have joined the movement of becoming land degradation neutral by 2030, including the Sudan. So this is really good news for us. The second thing you have to do is to go to scale. Practical action, it's a favorite of ours because we gave them that award, provides technologies, but a lot of these technologies are small scale. The question is, how do you go to scale? How is it that you can move from a little and a small experiment to an ecosystem? Because you have to think from a large perspective. If this is going to transform the lives of people, if it's going to transform the lives of young people, you have to think that's that large scale. The third thing then you have to think about is how to generate multiple benefits from that going to scale. And this is where the convention is working with, whether it's regional governments and the private sector, to create jobs for young people in Africa who are migrating. Like, I think it was Franklin Roosevelt who did land agricultural transformation in the United States. We're looking at helping communities to begin to form businesses out of land restoration activities like this, so that you can restore degraded land. Why not ask the private sector that wants to acquire land in Africa to restore the land and then use the land? Why give them new land that we really need? This is what we're talking about, creating jobs for women and for young people. Let me finish with the last alternative we're giving, or we're proposing. It's the drought initiative. Setting up national drought plans. Believe it or not, you know how many people have died in Africa as a result of droughts. Over the last century, drought was the largest natural cause of deaths from natural disasters, drought. A lot of it was in Africa, but people don't have to die of drought. What is the problem then? That we're going hungry time after time, we're having drought emergencies because we don't have national drought plans. One country in Africa, one, has a national drought plan that's comprehensive and that's effective. We're asking all Commonwealth countries, and not just Commonwealth countries, all countries in Africa to actually have a drought plan. What does it do for you? First, it helps you to assess who's vulnerable. Second, it helps you to monitor and have an early warning system. And third, there is need for coherence, because what normally happens is wait until it's too late to declare a drought so that we then get financed from humanitarian aid. We can actually avert that through pre-planning, whether it's land management, this is one of the solutions, but also in terms of having a system where when the drought strikes, somebody calls it and it motivates everybody else to act. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. We are running out of time. This is defeating us. So what I'd like to do now is to open the floor to questions to the panel. and we're disregarding the barriers, so everybody is going to ask questions. If we take the gentleman there with his hand up, the third row back. Is there a microphone that comes to them? Or do you just have to speak very loudly? You've got a big African voice.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. First, please, I would like to create the indulgence of the speakers for us to get the papers presented today, for recommendations and implementation. All the papers, please, we like either by soft copy or by hard copies. Please, we don't mind.
We're emailing it to all the delegates.
Okay, please, we don't mind. Thank you. Then I'll have send out my questions to every speaker, but I'll have to just limit it because of other people that want to ask. Now, the first question I want to ask is that what is the Commonwealth member state panel on climate change? What are the recommendations in terms of the practicality and the implementation? That's my first question, and it goes to my very first speaker. Then to our father from Sudan, please, I want to ask, how can the people in rural areas in Africa spread? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. To our father from Sudan, please, how can the people in rural areas in Africa spread and also be aware of the continuous problems and solutions to a sustainable climatic change? What are the procedures, what are the things, the steps you've taken in order for people in rural areas to be aware of all these problems and lasting solutions to it? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the first question really is the recommendations on climate change. That's what we wanted to be answered, and we'll address that to Olga with the specific recommendations.
I think, as I said in my speech, the water scarcity and water security issues are not caused only by climate change. So the solutions are also not only to address the climate change, but to address the underlying threats to water security and vulnerabilities. And to do that, we need to integrate much better the water and sanitation policies with adaptation policies, and also increase the finance that needs to go into water and sanitation as an adaptation measure. The second thing that needs to be done in sort of a practical recommendation is improve the governance and sector capacity. So planning, service provision and monitoring at all levels, so that we ensure, for example, during the drought, to ensure that the different demands of different stakeholders and competing priorities are well managed and moderated. At the moment, for example, the drought that is happening in Cape Town, one of the solutions to that is to moderate between the usage of water, between the domestic consumption and the use by the agricultural sector, because it turns into a big political issue. Thirdly, SDG 6, Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is about water security, water and sanitation, is the most underfunded of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the aid budget for it is decreasing, that it is not very commercially attractive, and the domestic resource mobilization is not up to the standard. So there needs to be a strong push for blended funding for it from both public funds through taxation, transfers and tariffs, as well as through commercial investment. And thirdly, improving inclusion of the most marginalized people in water resource management and in services is really critical. If we look at when there is increasing temperatures, it's causing a potential increase in waterborne diseases such as cholera in endemic settings. And if we look at sort of how the cholera is met, it is endemic in water-poor areas, which are areas where poor people live. So, including the most marginalized communities in decisions. So that's a couple of practical recommendations. Thank you.
And the second part of the question was to His Excellency the Minister as to how rural areas could be made aware of the problem, how to get the message to those people who aren't often easy to reach.
Yes. You see, our job is to go to the people in the countryside, in the rural areas. Our job is to raise the training and capacity building of the people. Either our personnel, how to deal with the poor people in the countryside, or to go to them in their places, how to raise the standard of living, how to building projects for water catchment and water harvesting projects, or sometimes water spreading for the people to stop conflicts between them, to stop wars around water, because water is the key issue, our key issue. We are working for peace, stability, and development. So, most of the conflicts in the countryside or in the rural side is around water, scarcity of water, or sometimes, for example, in Sudan, water is available near the river Nile banks, and water is very scarce when you go far from the river Nile or from the valleys. So our job is to carry water from where it is abundant to where it is scarce, and our job is to make water harvesting, great water harvesting projects, not violent. Violent doesn't help. We need great, big or small or medium water harvesting projects to for the people to avoid conflicts and to avoid having no water sometimes. So it is really a difficult task. It is not an easy task to deal with people in villages, and now the rate of urbanization is very high. People are moving from villages to cities because in cities they find services, all services required. In villages, the services are not high. Sometimes even water is not available. But we are now trying to let the villagers stay, and also we want to avoid problems of IDPs or refugees or going abroad or problems of migration, because we need our youth to stay for the development of the country.
Questions from the floor? Jumping down the pen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just to lay, if you like, foundation to what I want. My main focus is basically on the first objective of the 2063 Prosperous Africa Initiative. Sorry, let me start again. My main focus is on the first objective of the 2063 project, a prosperous Africa. So my questions are more or less based around that. My first question is to Olga, Water Aid. It's a curiosity because I get a lot of requests from Water Aid. The question is how much of each pound that is raised in donation goes into actual projects in Africa as opposed to overheads. My second question is to doctors and the minister. And I think you partly answered the question. Basically, is to ask what plans are in place to prevent another Darfur. Therefore, it was a very painful experience. I lost 2 friends in that war, and I'm not sure that is something I want to go through again. Charlotte, I have a question for you as well. It's basically, what's the carbon cost of producing your materials? You did speak about the supermarket. You did speak about the sustainable materials that you use. And the question really is, do you intend to set up production of these materials in Africa, or do you intend to manufacture them in Europe and transport them back to Africa? I've got praises for Mr. Tusk, not because I like MS, but because
We know why.
but because I like the local businesses very and I think it's worthy of recommendation. And Ms. Skinner? You did mention the national plan. I'm just curious, I'm from Nigeria. Is Nigeria a signatory to that plan?
I was going to, so 3 countries, I think you said, weren't signed up to the plan. 3 countries, are you prepared to name and shame them?
Happily, it's not Nigeria. The map is over there, so.
I can't see that as their map.
No. Next one.
But you're not going to name the 3 countries. You can tell us who.
It has to do with the war situation in those countries. Mali, I think, and Libya, and I think it's Western Sahara. So it's not the one.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Right, so I'll go through those questions. I think I've got them. So let's start with Charlotte, because we haven't heard from you yet. Really just about the cost of materials and whether you'll be manufacturing in Africa or outside and bringing into Africa. And is Africa relatively green?
So your question is absolutely spot on, because that's exactly what this is about. This is about improving the supply and value chain, creating jobs, developing skills, capacity building, and secure a sustainable future. And giving the young people a reason for staying in the rural areas, because it can become sexy also living in the rural areas. It's not only going on in the cities. So, I suggest the cooperation between TESO and Sudan, because TESO in Uganda has the problem that half of the year they are overflooded, and some of the cattle dealers, they even go over to TESO for Kenya to make that cattle fat, to sell it back in Kenya, and the other half of the year they have dropped in TESO. So we have to look at naturalization of rivers and water, but maybe it's a common project across borders. This conference is also about networking.
Yeah.
So, coming to the sustainable forest management, and why did we build the supermarket with wood? Because the overall corporate strategy of our client, the big German river group, was sustainability in all elements of their organization. So we chose the symbol and planted a 12-meter high tree in front of the supermarket. It cost 25,000 euro, so the construction department didn't want to pay, but marketing said, fantastic, right? That was the origin of the building materials. So what is this about? We can, instead of transporting all the wood from deforestation down to the cities and produce them into paper or other stuff there, we should create the jobs in the rural areas. Creating forest villages where we can produce, create jobs, give skills, and care for a rural sustainable development long term. That can be done, and think about one, because I mentioned the value and supply chain before. If we think about gold, when do we get the most money for gold? When we sell it as gold bars, or if we sell it as jewelry? I think I don't need to ask the question. The same thing we could do with the forest and do sustainable forest management. Train In Germany, actually the second biggest business arm is sustainable forest and wood-based industries. It's the second biggest business after the car automobile industry. Think about that. That's a big business, and Africa has much more forest and the potential of getting more forest. And at the same time, the forests are carbon eaters, and it captures the water and takes care of the water balance. So I learned about, at one of your conferences in Bonn in the past, I came back to my house and I was happy. I learned about agroforestry. That is one of the solutions for Africa. Combine forestry to give shade with also agriculture. But there are many other solutions, but the question is definitely yes. We shall build with wooden materials in Africa, but also produce these building materials in Africa and involve local people. We might be needed also short term. One day you will come along without us, but we will still be happy to be invited and involved because we believe in and want to support Africa.
The countryside sexy, I like that. David Croft, I think the question was about how Diageo would encourage local business and work with people already on the ground and how you grow small business.
When I think particularly about the farmers who supply it, part of our job is to help them grow. And so the work that we do is about helping them develop farmers, training them, making certain they have access to affordable finance, cheaper than they may be able to borrow, making certain they are able to access affordable fertilisers and the right types of seeds, and seeds of the right quality. All of that then adds together, and what we've seen in that work is probably they've doubled or even tripled their productivity per hectare, and increasingly they're doing it in a way that has long-term sustainability as far as the use of water on a small farm is concerned. And the difference that makes is fundamental. A lady in Ethiopia was telling me, single-parent family, and she was able to keep her 4 children at school because of the extra productivity she was creating. So that's just one example of how our work in communities supports their livelihoods but drives our supply chain as well. And entrepreneurs throughout the marketplace are there. The one thing I would really like to see more entrepreneurs thinking about would be things like plastics recycling in Africa. It's a real challenge in terms of how the environment is developing. And actually, plastics are seen as a very affordable route in terms of packaging to get products to people. But we need to try and close the loop on that. And I think entrepreneurs and support for the recycling sector will be a real opportunity for Africa as it looks to grow towards 2063.
Thank you. Just to come back to the question on Darfur, to the Minister, what plans and efforts are there in place to prevent that ever happening again?
Yes. Well, in fact, Darfur crisis, Darfur problem, is a result of the first hand. Without it, I can say it was a result of climate change. I mean, most of even Sudan itself was a victim of climate change because rain started to be very few in some areas and very heavy in other areas. There was an involuntary movement of the people and of the pastoralists to the agriculturalists, and conflicts arise. Very severe conflicts. Then wars, then problems of intimidation, politicization, armed groups, armed rebels, and then it was a tug of war. This took 10 years, in fact. The war started for more than 10 years now. The war stopped, but we have problems of refugees, problems of IDPs, problems of food insecurity, and problems of health, medical care, and I think we are about to overcome all or most of these difficulties. But the problems of water, we have made good schemes for water harvesting and water drilling submersible wells, and trying to make water catchment as much as possible. We spent on that. Also the international community, especially the EU, European Union, they spent on that. The government of Sudan is spending on that. I think now things are coming to the better, and this very painful problem came to an end.
I'll bring that towards Smith now, because you said that you spent time in Sudan. You're talking before about technology, and the fact that actually perhaps you do have to marry the traditional methods.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the water harvesting programs that His Excellency is talking about is exactly the work that Practical Action is involved in. And there are technologies, but it is about engaging those technologies with communities, finding those solutions where you work with the sedentary agriculturalists and with the moving pastoralists, and finding those solutions that will work today and in the future. The challenges of climate change are many indeed, but negotiating and finding those solutions in the long term, they will exist, whether it's weather forecasting so people know what to plant for the year ahead, whether it's local kiosks for urban settlements, whether it's irrigation systems using solar power because solar power is abundant in Africa. Those solutions exist, and it's not mega schemes that will solve the whole of Africa, it's almost community by community. Catching those stories of success and then scaling them up with private sector partners, with governments and with civil society.
Well, okay, I just wanted to bring you back in, because we are winding up now. Just you were talking about the drought initiative, and I think when you think of natural disasters, you feel that the population that are victim to it, there's nothing they can do. But what you were suggesting is that actually with planning, you can mitigate the outcome.
You know, some people might remember that there used to be
in the United States in the 1930s, they had serious problems with land acquisition and a lot of problems with drought. They're still having drought now. Nobody's dying. There is a different problem in the US in relation to water. But with respect to Africa, a lot of the drought impacts can be mitigated early by restoring some of the land, as I showed. You know, some of the restoration can happen. But in relation to that, a big problem with it is that there is no central government institution that actually acts on drought when drought happens. We don't even know who's the most vulnerable, and mind you, drought is changing in scale, in severity, in terms of where it's actually going to be. So we need to do those kinds of vulnerability assessments to understand where those people are. Second thing is, when the drought happens, we don't have to wait until people are starting to die to announce it. In some countries, in Brazil for instance, in the northeastern of Brazil, there is actually a drought problem often, and sometimes as bad as in Africa, but they have risk insurance schemes. What that has meant, for instance, is in the good years, the farmers pay a small amount of money to the government. When the drought hits, they are informed early in advance, they're told not to cultivate the land, and they're given a payout so that they can continue to live and support their families. So there are things like this that we can do. We need the presidents to be calling out drought and action to be taken immediately, because once the president says, everybody runs around it. But right now there's so much diffuseness in terms of activity that there is no single arm that gets to do it until it's too late. So there are things that I think we can do in advance. And the idea of developing national drought plans in every country would require that we actually also vest that authority in somebody, often the president, so this is where we hope we can get to.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the entire panel this afternoon. Some very interesting concepts and ideas, and I believe that they will be made available to you in papers, but lots for all those who are coming into London today to take back to their countries and work on. So I hope that you've really learned. I've certainly learned a lot, so thank you very much, panel. Thank you.